Hey, gang. So, is this title being a little dramatic? Yes. But is it being clickbaity? Also, yes. Hey, I want to hit 1700 before the end of the year. So like and subscribe and all that junk. Anyways, I've noticed some misconceptions out there, even in my tiny channel's comments, so I felt this might be a good topic to jump into. Not to mention, I believe these two mechanics will have a greater impact on this game and how it's played than any other to date. Let's stop burying the lead here. Let's just get right into it. It helps they kind of go hand in hand. We should be seeing them drop pretty close to one another. Engineering's been knocking on the door for what feels like 5 years now, mostly because it has. But now it seems like it's opening that door and not just knocking. Again, yeah, I know we've been here a few times before, but for real, it's close. And not Stars isn't close, but actually close. So people that have been buying the big ships have been seeing this shadow looming for years, or at least they should have. But I've noticed dismissive comments from owners of smaller ships, even in the comment section of my own tiny channel. Starting off, they're right that the impacts on smaller ships probably won't be as severe just because there's fewer things to light on fire and there's not internals on most of these ships that people are talking about. But solo pilots and captains will definitely have to pay attention to wear and tear and run some beams over it for upkeep. For people who are doing low impact things like, say, mining or hauling or salvaging, this probably won't be anything too crazy. If they're in those loops, they're probably not constantly redlining their ships, so they shouldn't really be pushing it past its limits. Occasional upkeep should be good. Maybe they'll have to replace a cooler or three every couple months, or, repair them when they start to wear down. But for people engaged in the spicier loops, mostly combat, well, that's going to be a different story. Not only are they pushing their ships to the limits constantly, but they'll likely be taking fire and damage to those same components. And a quick aside here, the future of combat, which is now the very near future, those health pools of ships will be going away. It won't be reduced target from 10,000 hit points to 0 hit points and it goes boom or soft deaths, but rather it'll be hitting it in enough of the components that either shuts down or those components fail or overheat, and then it goes boom or just, like I said, shuts down. It's subtle, but it's a really significant change from the way things are working right now. And I'll be getting more into that aspect of things in a second, so hold that in mind. For this argument, just realize that the components are going to directly control how effective your ship is. And the more wear and tear or straight up damage is happening to those components is going to directly impact the operation of the ship. Its shields, its weapons, its coolers, its radar, its overall power. The larger the ship, the more distributed this power structure is. While this gives the larger ships more redundancy than a small ship, it's also more things that can go wrong and more individual things that need to be tracked down and upkept. If you're tooling around in an arrow, all your components are right there. If they take damage or serious wear and you're seeing power fluctuations, yeah, you're probably fine just hopping out and running some RMC beams over it, or then getting it fixed or replaced when you land. Obviously, with a bigger ship, it's going to be a little bit more involved and expensive. Again, with the small ship, the thing is just going to get shut down or blowed up. With a bigger ship, you can keep it going. Bigger ships will need to have a dedicated engineer because there's just too much to stay on top of. Too many big components, too much wear and tear to keep track of, and so on. With a combat ship, that's going to be even more exacerbated. But for the people who think they won't need to worry about engineering at all because they're in a small or solo ship, yeah, that's not going to be the case. Sure, if you're in something small and light, you won't need to be playing with the engineering screens or need an actual engineer running around on your fighter, but you will absolutely need to stay on top of your component health. In that case, think of it more like Luke Skywalker elbow deep in his X-Wing trying to get it off of Dagobah rather than Scotty on the Enterprise. But you will be engaged with the loop, or at least need to know someone who is. Actually, that might be a good loop for someone. Just fly around in a Liberator or an Idris and let the littles land aboard your ship and get them fixed up, basically mobile garages. I guess that's kind of the whole point of the Vulcan or the Crucible. So there, I reinvented the wheel. Let's get on to what I feel is a coming sea change that'll hit this project like a tsunami, maybe even more so than engineering. Yeah, that's right. Remember that bit before where I told you that hit point pools are going away? Well, this is what will end up replacing them: armor. While we have a lot of information about how engineering will work and what their goals are with it, CIG hasn't really coughed up a lot of information about armor. So a lot of what follows, I'll admit, is speculation on my part. I'm hoping I'm not too far off the mark, or I have no idea how this will work. While they haven't been real forthcoming about how armor will work, I assume it'll be a debuff on the damage a weapon does. So not a hit point pool, but a subtraction of the amount of damage a weapon does. Armor will be further buffed by shields, which will be more effective against energy attacks than physical ones, read bullets. This should give ballistic weapons a bit of an advantage because they will largely ignore shields, or at the very least be less impacted by them, pun fully intended, while energy weapons will have to deal with 100% of both. The advantage energy weapons have is that they'll obviously not have the same limitation of ammo. But that balancing, yeah, that's a whole other conversation. Staying on armor, yeah, it should just subtract incoming damage. Weapons will damage components when this rolls in, rather than just depleting an overall health pool for an area of a target ship. This means that attackers who know what they're doing will know where to hit a ship to disable certain components, like shields or power, or even the relay nodes for certain sections of the ship, being able to shut off whole sides of a ship. Knowing where to hit, or just getting lucky where you hit, will start to matter a lot more than just reducing that overall pool. So damage will directly impact components when it hits the right location, and armor will or should somehow debuff or subtract from that incoming effect or damage. The real question is how it'll do this, and yeah, this is where the speculation comes in. For my part, I think it will be related to the rating. We have weapons ranked with 10 tiers at the moment. It would make sense to have armor do the same thing. If a weapon and armor have the same rating, there's no real impact. The weapon does what it does and the armor does what it does. Subtracts a set amount from the incoming damage to the component. For the sake of argument, let's say this is 50%. And it's slightly more effective against ballistic than energy weapons. That way, if you get the shields down, energies flip the script and become more damaging. But I said we'd talk about that some other time in some other vid, so let's move on. For right now, sure. 50% of the damage to the component is knocked off thanks to the armor, the same rating as the weapon. But what if there's a difference in rating? If the armor rating is less than the weapon rating, then more damage should be let through to the component. This makes sense game-wise and thematically. You're in an Avenger Titan and you're hit with an Idris's railgun, you should be prepared to have a bad day. Games mechanics-wise, I'd say if the weapons rating is greater than the armor rating, then the effectiveness of the armor is halved. So 75% of the damage will get through to the component. If the weapons rating is double or more the armor rating, then it should ignore the armor altogether, allowing 100% to hit the component. And you could go the other way too. If the armor rating is higher than the weapon rating, then the damage is halved. So this would mean only 25% of the damage from the weapon would get through. And if the armor rating is double or more the weapon rating, then that weapon wouldn't get through the armor at all. This would be that effect of, say, shooting a pistol at a battleship. Unlike the game right now where you can pop an Idris with enough Furies, That wouldn't be the case any longer. The Idris could sit there and do nothing, and those Furies with their size 2 guns would never be able to damage it at all. So armors would be set up by the purpose and size of the ship. Bigger ships would have heavier tiers of armor than smaller ships. Military ships would have higher tiers of armor than civilian ones. And CIG could play with that to give ships different tankiness or different feel, giving them a one-off rating increase of a tier in exchange for, say, speed and maneuverability, kind of like the Terrapin, or more speed and maneuverability at the cost of a tier level, think Drake ships. You get the idea. You have the rule and you'd have exceptions, but I still wouldn't vary it too wildly or it becomes harder and harder to balance out, so probably not a tier in either, more than a tier in either direction. Weirdly, or perhaps not weirdly, this solves a balance problem that has plagued CIG since the early days of combat. The light fighter meta. Yeah, let's get into a little bonus section here. Just as a quick aside, it's always been the case that you have a smaller, more maneuverable ship, everything else being equal, you'll win. You're just a smaller target, and in the current game, if you're talking about hit point pools, or even just hitting specific spots and damaging components, you'll win. You can just maneuver your ship better than the bigger ship, and the bigger ship's easier to hit, so you can hit them accurately from further away. You're harder to hit, and so on. But armor balances that out a little bit. If a Fury packing size 2 has to hit, say, a Vanguard 4 times as often because the Vanguard has tier 4 armor, whereas if the Vanguard lands a single shot with the big size 5 up front, that Fury is going to have a bad time. So yeah, you can see how armor should, at least if it's implemented correctly, have a massive change on how the game is played. And just a quick aside on my quick aside, I think they should seriously rein in ranges and speeds. Light fighters should have insane maneuverability and acceleration, but a lower top speed, whereas heavy fighters should have comparatively lower maneuverability and acceleration, but higher top speed. So that way heavy fighters could kind of choose the engagement, but once they're engaged, be at a minor disadvantage to the light fighters, but they could get away if they found themselves getting swarmed. Likewise, light fighters could just dance around the heavy fighters in order to balance things out. For that bit about range, light fighters and smaller starters should have, say, a planetary range. So they're pretty much stuck being local. They could go between a planet and its local moons or the locations on that planet. Medium fighters could be interplanetary range. And then heavies could have the range of an entire system. It seems like that would pull in that Star Wars feel of, how did a TIE fighter get way out here? Littles should be stuck being local or taking a ride on a bigger ship to get somewhere else. Again, CIG could play with that with different ships, with ones that are longer range sacrificing maneuverability, armor, and or weapons for that honor. And going the other way where they lack longer range, but they're more heavily armored and more heavily weaponed. You get it. I don't know. That's just kind of a what I'd do if I ran the zoo kind of a thought for ship combat balance. What are yours? Do you think I'm way off here, or do you think these two mechanics, engineering and armor specifically, will have a huge impact on the game like I do? Let me know down below. Catch you next time.